one of these big quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, I understand exactly why Ryan Pace is saying what he is saying. But yeah, there is no question that these guys have these top-tier quarterbacks on their mind. The question, of course, is does Deshaun Watson get free? I spoke to an executive yesterday who said, look, believe it or not, Houston really isn't taking calls right now. The general manager, Nick Caserio, is not having these conversations. Now, it feels like at some point that will happen, probably nearer the draft. But right now, it feels like you have a very desperate QB-needy team in the Bears, and you have a commodity that seems like it would garner a lot of compensation. So to me, the wonder is this the time? Is the time now for the Texans to get the most possible for Deshaun Watson by trading him to the Bears?
Yeah, that feels like it makes a lot of sense to us. Now, Rob Ninkovich, again, you're a Chicago area kid, and we've joked around a lot on this show. You do the voice and everything else. But let's be an analyst here for a moment. Should the Bears right now give the Texans anything they want for Deshaun Watson?
Yes, 100%, and I'll explain why. Let me paint a little picture for you. Under Nagy, their defense is number 2, and offensively they're ranked 24th. So if you have a defense that's basically built to win championships and your offense is struggling, ranked 24th, bottom of the league consistently, well, guess what? If you go out and you get a great quarterback, not only is that going to raise the level of your offense, but the defense is going to be considerably more confident that every time they step on that football field, all they have to do is get the ball to the offense, and the offense will do their job. There's no, okay, defense, we need to score here because we know our offense can't get the job done. If they get a great quarterback, they're going to be able to have a defense and an offense combined, which should put them in a great spot to win a division.
Look, they've basically been waiting 101 years since they were formed in 1920 as the Decatur Staleys to get a quarterback the caliber of Deshaun Watson. And Torrey Smith, people arguing on the other side will say, well, you can't give up all those #1 draft picks. What would you say to them?
They're out of their mind. You give away all of those draft picks. You know, a sure thing at the quarterback position is way better than any draft pick you could possibly have. I don't care how many first rounders it takes. There are so many great players in this league, Pro Bowlers, Hall of Famers, who are drafted after the first round. So if you have a guy that can be the anchor of your offense and the face of your franchise for the next 10 years, you make that trade, and you're built to win right now. You can find complementary pieces to help improve your team in different areas on the offensive line, add more weapons at the receiver position in later parts of the draft. But those first-round draft picks, they can go. Deshaun Watson is the real deal, and you force them, you give them a trade that's so good that they can't turn it down.
I'm glad you said that. It was in your notes last night, and I wanted to bring that up here because sometimes I think we talk about these teams as though if they trade away their first-round pick, they don't even draft that year. It's just one of the many picks you can make. If you scout this thing right, you can still have a big night on draft night. And Jeff Darlington, the Russell Wilson of all of this, plays into it as well, right? Deshaun Watson was the one guy in this conversation that the Bears wanted.
Right.
If Russell Wilson really starts to become available, that could end the Texans.
Well, yeah, to your point, right now supply and demand is such that there is one elite quarterback on the market, seemingly. I mean, obviously he's still not technically because Caserio has not taken those calls, but there is a belief around the league that he will be available. There is not that same belief that Russell Wilson will be available yet. But if this relationship between Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson degenerates to the point where Russ says, I want out, all of a sudden supply and demand changes a little bit. Now you got 2 elite quarterbacks. Now the Bears can say, hey, take our offer. Maybe they'll take it instead. That, to my earlier point, is the reason why maybe it's in Houston's best interest to do it now. We should also point out, though, it's not as if we're just talking about this year's compensation. Like, the Jets seem to have the best potential package for this year's draft picks. But you have a guy in Caserio who'd probably take future picks. He's a new GM there, future first-round picks, and a guy in Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, who, by the way, if they don't get a quarterback, they're probably out next year anyway. Why not just give up the future to get the present? That's what they need to do at this point.
Now, there's a level of urgency here that I think people should be feeling. We are just a few days away from the closing of the franchise tag period, the beginning of the new league year. These deals need to get done starting right now. Speaking of Russell Wilson, let's get to that NFC West, because a move that could put more pressure on him is this. J.J. Watt signing with the Cardinals, as we know, a 2-year deal worth $31 million, $23 million of that guaranteed. And you look at that loaded division with all those great defenses like the one in San Francisco, the one in L.A., and now Chandler Jones and J.J. Watt playing together in Arizona. And that had our Torrey Smith tweeting this: Chandler and J.J., Russ is really going to ask for a trade if they don't bolster up that offensive line. Even Chandler Jones responded on Twitter, I feel bad for my guy. He feels bad for the quarterback whose life he is now planning to ruin. So, Jeff, you touched on it a moment ago, but let's get more deeply into it here. Deshaun Watson, everyone believes, is going to become available, or at least there's a good chance that will happen. What do people believe about Russell Wilson?
Look, like I said, people don't necessarily believe around the league that he springs available, and that's their belief, that's their inclination. The comparison that I would make here is to Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, and not just last year. The relationship last year between Belichick and Brady, we thought needed to go through marriage counseling. That relationship was already dead. But they had spent years before that dealing with some frustrations. I mean, going back 7, 8 years. There are moments behind the scenes. Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson are now, in my opinion, going through that phase of their relationship. They can bridge this gap if they can find a way to sit down and hammer this out. The one caution I'd have here, though, is that Tom Brady and Bill Belichick had Robert Kraft to sort of step in and mediate. I don't know that Russ and Pete have that guy. That's the one thing that keeps sticking in my mind. Are they going to be able to get through this if the two of them can sit down and hammer this out? That's the next phase of the Russell Wilson Seahawks drama right now.
That's fascinating. They really may be at that tipping point as we speak. And Tori, I loved the analogy you were making as you and I were talking this morning about the way Russell, just the little hints, the little breadcrumbs that he's dropping out there.
Yeah, Russell Wilson has the most passive-aggressive approach I've ever seen to wanting to get out or potentially staying. It reminds me of my wife when we're trying to decide where we want to eat. We like to eat at Jimmy's Seafood in Baltimore all the time, but she was like, well, I wouldn't mind if we went to Miss Carter's Kitchen or Ruth Chris or anywhere else. Like, what do you want? That doesn't make any sense. Do you want to be here or do you want to go? Let's be clear on what you want. And so, exactly, and that's exactly what I'm seeing out of Russell Wilson right now in this passive-aggressive approach. To me, it screams a cry for help. Help me out. Protect me. But on the other end, I can see Russell Wilson wanting to leave, understanding that he's an athlete that thinks beyond the game, similar to Magic Johnson or LeBron James, when you're talking about guys who are able to build empires both on and off of the field. So Russell Wilson is a very strategic and smart man. He knows what he's doing, but we'll see how Seattle responds.
Yeah, he may not have taken both steps out of the organization yet, but it feels like he has taken one. So, Rob Ninkovich, if you're right now, you're Pete Carroll, you're the people in Seattle, what do you need to be doing?
Well, at all costs, whatever you do, you have to avoid what's going on down in Houston with the Texans. So whatever Russell needs, if he needs an extra offensive lineman, you go out in free agency, you go get the best lineman available. You go in the draft, you pick the best lineman available in the first round. Whatever draft pick you feel you need to do to go out there and shore up that offensive line and protect Russell Wilson, that's what you need to do, especially in a division where you're playing teams that have arguably the best defensive fronts that can get after the quarterback. So what do you need? Well, first of all, you need a great offensive line and you need a great receiver. They have the receivers. Now they need to get the offensive line. So if you're Seattle, you try and mend this as best possible. You go get somebody, you bring him in, you sit down with Russell Wilson and you say, look, what do you want? And we'll get it. And that's how you mend it.
And the thread of commonality, it's a great point. And the thread of commonality amongst the three stories here, these are all being driven by the players. A league that for 100 years, the teams have basically done what they wanted to do. These are three stories that are all being driven primarily by the star players involved.